Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione.
Luigi Mangione.
A judge has denied bail to the suspect.
Many people are sympathizing with him.
But Donald Trump has branded support for the suspect.
Maybe it's fake news. I don't know. It's hard to believe that
24 people here standing in support of Mangione.
Universal health care now or free Luigi.
Luigi Mangione's legal battle just got more intense today. We're diving into one of the most talked about cases in the country, a courtroom showdown that's got everything murder accusations, shocking allegations, and a legal battle that's sending shockwaves through the justice system.
A 26-year-old man has been charged with the health insurance executive who was shot in the street in New York last week.
Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old whose life now hangs in the balance as he faces charges that could lead to a sentence no one can ignore.
Luigi Mangione is facing an 11-count indictment, including first-degree in the furtherance of.
Investigators say if he's found guilty in that case, he could face the penalty.
The media frenzy, the political undertones, and the questions of fairness that have everyone from legal experts to everyday people asking what's really going on here. Stick around as we break down the twists, the turns, and the high-stakes drama that's got New York City and the entire nation. Watching recently, Luigi Mangione appeared in court to plead not guilty to a range of serious charges.
Luigi Mangione entering a not guilty plea for the 11 criminal charges he faces in the case of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Including 11 state-level accusations, such as first-degree murder, and as well as additional federal charges that carry the possibility of the death penalty.
But Mangione could be back in federal court again in the coming days once we get an indictment there. Investigators say if he's found guilty in that case, he could face the penalty.
His arraignment took place in the heart of New York City, where the courtroom was filled with an almost palpable tension.
Mangione appearing today in shackles and under heavy guard, dressed in a maroon sweater and khaki pants. He pled not guilty to 11 charges, including as an act.
Packed to capacity, the room included journalists, legal experts, and even a handful of Mangione supporters, all keen to witness the proceedings firsthand. This case, with its mix of grave allegations and public attention, has become one of the most discussed legal battles in recent memory. What immediately stood out to those present wasn't just the gravity of the charges, but the way Mangione presented himself rather than appearing in the standard orange prison jumpsuit typically worn by defendants. He arrived wearing khaki pants, a crisp white button-down shirt, and a burgundy sweater.
Prison jumpsuit in sight. Instead, Mangione was all cleaned up in a burgundy sweater over a white dress shirt, while his supporters showed up both outside and inside court.
It was a deliberate choice, almost certainly orchestrated by his defense team to frame him in a specific light. The aim was clear: to present Mangione as composed, approachable, and far removed from the image of a hardened criminal. This decision to deviate from the usual attire carries weight, especially in high-profile cases like this one. Clothing in courtrooms can act as a nonverbal form of communication, subtly influencing how a defendant is received by judges, jurors, and even the public. Watching from afar, a neatly dressed defendant might seem more relatable or even innocent to onlookers, especially when contrasted with the stark imagery associated with prison uniforms. This tactic, while not uncommon, demonstrates how every detail in a high-stakes case is meticulously planned. The choice of attire was likely meant to counterbalance the serious nature of the charges against him.
Mangione is facing 11 counts, including first-degree in connection with terrorism for allegedly United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson nearly 3.
Mangione faces allegations that are nothing short of monumental. The charges include first-degree murder, a crime considered one of the most heinous in the legal system, and a term that carries heavy connotations and is often linked to larger societal fears on the federal level. The potential penalties are equally severe, with the death penalty looming as a possibility if he is convicted. The 26-year-old could face the death penalty if found guilty, The courtroom atmosphere during his arraignment reflected the weight of these accusations. Prosecutors were stern and methodical in their approach, laying out their case with an air of confidence that suggested they believe the evidence is firmly on their side. Meanwhile, Mang's defense attorneys worked hard to counteract this narrative, focusing not just on their client's innocence, but also on how the case was being framed by the prosecution and public officials. One of the more compelling aspects of the arraignment was the presence of Mann supporters who came to the courtroom to show solidarity. In many high-profile cases, supporters can play a subtle but important role in shaping public perception. Their presence suggests that Mangione has people who believe in his innocence, or at the very least in his right to a fair trial.
A group of supporters cheering on the accused. All eyes on a 26-year-old recent Ivy League graduate whose actions have rocked the nation to its core. Here's Eyewitness News reporter Josh Reiniger.
This is particularly significant, given the highly charged nature of the accusations against him. The courtroom wasn't just a place for legal arguments. It was a stage for public messaging. Man's defense team, led by experienced attorneys Mark Ilo and Karen Friedman, left no stone unturned in challenging the prosecution's approach. Agillo in particular highlighted what she called a political atmosphere surrounding the case.
Some sort of political fodder, like some sort of spectacle. He was on display for everyone to see in the biggest staged perp walk I've ever seen in my career. It was absolutely unnecessary. He's been cooperative with law enforcement. He had been in custody for over a week.
She argued that the way Mangione was extradited to New York, a high-profile event, complete with a heavy police presence and statements from the city's mayor, had created a spectacle that could undermine her client's right to a fair trial.
Honor, I'm very concerned about my client's right to a fair trial in this case. He's being prejudiced by some statements that are being made by government officials.
For Mangione, the day was a study in contrast. On one hand, he faced a courtroom filled with legal arguments, media scrutiny, and public tension. On the other hand, his defense team worked to present him as composed and resolute, choosing their words and actions carefully to counteract the prosecutions narrative. His choice of attire also played into this dynamic. Dressed in khaki pants, a white button-down shirt, and a burgundy sweater, Mangione's appearance was a calculated move to project an image of normalcy and relatability. This was a deliberate shift from the standard jumpsuits often worn by defendants, emphasizing his legal team's focus on humanizing their client in the eyes of the court and the public. As the proceedings unfolded, it became clear that this case is about much more than the charges themselves. It's a reflection of how high-profile cases are shaped by public perception, media narratives, and legal strategies from Mangione legal team. The focus is not just on defending their client against the allegations, but also on challenging the broader context in which this trial is taking place. Inside the courtroom, Mangione exuded an air of calm, sitting quietly as his legal team meticulously presented their case. He listened intently, maintaining a composed demeanor, while his attorneys launched pointed criticisms of the case's handling and its potential implications. Karen Friedman Agnifilo, one of Mangione's attorneys, highlighted comments from Adams that painted her client in an extremely negative light. Agillo argued that such statements undermined Mangione's right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, a foundational principle of the justice system. The charges Mangione faces are some of the most serious within the justice system. On the federal side, he is accused of murder and stalking, with potential penalties that could include life imprisonment or even capital punishment. At the state level, the charges include first-degree murder tied to broader alleged actions, a charge that is rarely invoked in New York, or significant public harm. Mangione's defense team has seized on the complexity of these overlapping charges as a key point in their strategy. Agnel pointed out what she described as inconsistencies between the state and federal charges. She suggested that the prosecution was attempting to amplify the severity of the case by pursuing charges on multiple fronts, creating a more complicated legal environment than necessary. According to the defense, this approach not only risks overwhelming jurors with conflicting narratives, but also raises questions about the coordination between state and federal prosecutors. Adding to the complexity, Agnifilo emphasized the spectacle surrounding MINS' case. From the very beginning, particularly his extradition to New York, the defense team described it as a highly publicized event designed to create an image of guilt in the eyes of the public. A heavy police presence, a swarm of media, and direct involvement from city officials all contributed to what the defense labeled as an orchestrated effort to sway public opinion. The courtroom itself was a reflection of the heightened attention surrounding this case. Media representatives packed the gallery alongside attorneys, court staff, and a mix of spectators outside the courthouse. The atmosphere was no less intense, with protesters and supporters gathered to make their voices heard. Protesters carried signs and banners calling for justice, emphasizing the gravity of the allegations and their demand for accountability. Meanwhile, Manon supporters rallied behind him, voicing concerns about the fairness of the proceedings, and in some cases using this platform to draw attention to broader systemic issues. Among these issues were debates over justice system practices and the societal implications of cases that become political lightning rods. The alleged victim in this case, Brian Thompson, was a high-profile figure in the healthcare industry, serving as the CEO of United Healthcare. This connection has added another layer of complexity, with some of Meng's supporters framing the case as a lens through which to examine the healthcare system itself. They argued that the trial highlights underlying issues within the industry, sparking conversations that extend far beyond the courtroom. This spectacle wasn't lost on the public. The courtroom proceedings were matched by a buzz of activity outside the courthouse, where protesters and supporters gathered to voice their opinions for Mangione himself. The day appeared to be one of quiet resolve. Observers noted that he listened intently as his attorney spoke, showing no visible signs of distress or agitation. To fight the charges against him, no matter how daunting they might seem. His defense team's strategy seemed focused not just on contesting the charges, but also on challenging the narrative around the case by pointing out perceived political motivations and questioning the fairness of the proceedings. They are laying the groundwork for what will likely be a contentious legal battle. Manon's legal team includes two prominent attorneys, Mark Illo and Karen Fredman Agnifilo, who bring a wealth of experience to his defense. As a seasoned and dynamic duo, they are crafting a legal strategy designed to address not only the charges against Mangione, but also the larger context in which the case is unfolding. Agillo in particular has wasted no time in taking a firm stance, openly challenging what she described as highly unusual tactics employed by both federal and state prosecutors. Agnello's central argument hinges on her belief that this case has been politicized from the outset. She asserts that Mangione is being used as a symbol to serve broader agendas, rather than being treated fairly as an individual defendant. This claim stems from the public and heavily orchestrated nature of Mangione's extradition to New York, which became a focal point during the court proceedings. The extradition itself was nothing short of theatrical. A heavy police presence lined the streets. Media cameras were everywhere, and even the city's mayor was present to deliver statements. The scene had the air of a major public event, rather than a procedural transfer. And Agnel was quick to highlight this during her arguments. She contended that such a spectacle was not only unnecessary, but also potentially damaging to her client's right to a fair trial by creating a highly charged environment filled with media attention and public scrutiny. She argued the prosecution has set a tone that could bias jurors and the public long before the trial even begins. These orchestrated displays, according to Agnifilo, were designed to send a political message, rather than to ensure justice. She described them as a deliberate effort to shape public opinion against Mangione, and to make him a scapegoat in a case that carries significant social implications. Her arguments resonated with many observers, who noted the unusual level of public involvement from city officials and the timing of the media coverage. The atmosphere outside the courthouse was equally charged. Protesters and supporters gathered in significant numbers, each group with its own agenda. On one side, those seeking justice for the alleged crimes held up signs and chanted slogans emphasizing the severity of the accusations. Their presence reflected the deep emotions tied to the case, as well as a broader demand for accountability and transparency in high-profile legal matters on the other side of the spectrum, were Mayan supporters, a mix of individuals who questioned the fairness of the legal process and those who saw this case as an opportunity to discuss systemic issues within the healthcare industry. Inside the courtroom, Mayan's legal team sought to cut through the noise and focus on the facts. ILO and AGO's approach was meticulous, with every statement and objection carefully calculated to lay the groundwork. For their client defense, one of the key points emphasized by the defense was the potential for bias created by the pretrial publicity. AGO pointed out that the level of media coverage, combined with the highly publicized extradition and statements from city officials, has created an environment where it may be challenging to find impartial jurors. Meanwhile, the prosecutors maintained their focus on presenting a strong case. Their approach in the courtroom was methodical, aimed at conveying the seriousness of the accusations, while countering the defense's claims of politicization. Attorneys' efforts to ensure Mangione faces charges in New York. The expedited pace of the case highlights the seriousness of the allegations and the focus of law enforcement on achieving swift justice. Mangione, currently held in a Pennsylvania prison cell, has been under close watch. Since his arrest, authorities in New York are reportedly eager to bring him into their jurisdiction, emphasizing the importance of moving forward without unnecessary delays. An indictment would simplify the extradition process, providing legal grounds to transfer him to New York for prosecution. The urgency surrounding this case is evident in the coordinated actions of law enforcement and prosecutors. While extradition cases can often face delays, the timeline here suggests a concerted effort to accelerate proceedings. A grand jury indictment would not only formalize the charges against Mangione, but also bolster the legal framework for his transfer to New York. The backdrop of this legal effort includes a series of events that led to Mangiane's arrest after being reported missing by his mother last month. A San Francisco police officer recognized similarities between images of Mangione linked to a New York investigation and a missing persons report. This recognition was a turning point, prompting law enforcement to contact the FBI and Mangione's mother, who confirmed that the images matched her son within days. Mangione was taken into custody, marking the start of his legal journey. Currently, Mangione's confinement in Pennsylvania remains under strict conditions. He is isolated in a concrete cell, eats all meals there, and has no access to a television or interaction with other inmates. Officials have stated that he is being treated like any other inmate, but his time in Pennsylvania is expected to be brief if the grand jury's decision leads to an indictment and subsequent extradition, as the grand jury convenes this week. The focus will remain on whether the evidence presented is sufficient to formalize charges. A decision in favor of indictment would mark a significant milestone, bringing Mangione one step closer to facing the legal process in New York. Even before Luigi Mangiane's formal extradition to New York, his defense team is laying the groundwork for a potentially complex legal strategy to counter what has been described as overwhelming evidence against him. Among the approaches being considered is the possibility of pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, a defense that carries its own set of challenges and implications. This strategy highlights not only the severity of the case, but also the intricate legal maneuvering required to provide Mangione with a fair trial. The discussion of an insanity defense emerged publicly when Mangione's attorney, who spoke on CNN prior to formally taking on the case, hinted at this potential avenue. The attorney acknowledged the strength of the evidence, suggesting it might be so compelling that a more traditional defense could be insufficient. The remarks were measured, but revealed an understanding of the uphill battle the defense is likely to face in court. It shifts the focus from whether the defendant committed the act to their mental state during the incident. If pursued in Mangione's case, it would require his legal team to present substantial evidence, including expert testimony from psychologists or psychiatrists, to support claims of severe mental illness or impairment. As the proceedings continued, the defense worked to counter the prosecution narrative by presenting Mangione as a composed and rational individual His choice of attire, a white button-down shirt, khaki pants, and a burgundy sweater, was a deliberate move to distance him from the typical image of a defendant in custody. The decision to forego the standard prison jumpsuit was part of a broader strategy to humanize Mangione and challenge preconceived notions about him, while the defense focused on questioning the procedural elements of the case. The prosecution maintained its emphasis on the seriousness of the charges, and the evidence they planned to present. Their strategy was to demonstrate that the dual charges